In 1949, Chairman Mao Zedong reunited China after decades of war and a brutal Japanese occupation. Meanwhile, the 13th Dalai Lama had passed away, and the young 14th Dalai Lama had taken his place. As part of the reunification of China, the government of Mao Zedong formulated the 17-Point Agreement, a document reaffirming China's sovereignty over Tibet. On May 23, 1951, representatives of the 14th Dalai Lama signed the agreement in Beijing. This agreement was returned to Lhasa and followed by a telegram on October 24, 1951, from the 14th Dalai Lama to the central government in Beijing, indicating his enthusiastic acceptance. These words, written by the 14th Dalai Lama, clearly state his support for the agreement. The Tibet local government, as well as the ecclesiastic and secular people, unanimously support this agreement, and under the leadership of Chairman Mao and the Central People's Government, will actively support the People's Liberation Army in Tibet to consolidate national defense, drive out imperial influences from Tibet, and safeguard the unification of the territory and the sovereignty of the motherland. The Chinese government continued to respect the Tibetan theocracy under the leadership of the 14th Dalai Lama, with the mutual understanding the Tibetan leadership would begin a transition away from feudal and oppressive practices. Both the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama were repeatedly honored guests of the central government in Beijing. Hadas, the long white silk scarves seen here, are the traditional Tibetan sign of welcome and respect. Both lamas were given a comprehensive tour of eastern China and granted rare access to top leadership. The 14th Dalai Lama was also appointed deputy chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. However, the failure of the Tibetan theocracy to shift towards the central government's more progressive policies became problematic. As a result, 8 years later, in 1959, encouraged and supported by separatist Western interests, namely the CIA, the senior monks and upper-class Tibetans challenged China's rule, resulting in an armed rebellion. The harsh retaliation of the central government during this period exacerbated tensions. This resulted in an unfavorable opinion in the Western media of China's sovereignty over Tibet, made possible by the fact that the Cold War CIA had already begun secretly collaborating with the Dalai Lama against China. This plaque is located at Camp Hale in Colorado, where ethnic Tibetans were trained for the rebellion against the Chinese. Eventually, the CIA aided the Dalai Lama in leaving Tibet for India and even arranged to have his so-called escape from Red China's tyranny filmed for use by Western media. Thereafter, the CIA funded the activities of the Dalai Lama for many years with millions of dollars. The individual members of the CIA believed in what they were doing, but simply put, the goal was to create problems for China, a country that the United States called an ally only a decade earlier. It is notable that the common people of Tibet did not participate in this rebellion to any significant extent. When the revolt failed, the 23-year-old 14th Dalai Lama and his high-ranking entourage fled to India with the help of the CIA and set up the government of Tibet in exile at Dharamshala. It is at this point in time that, in the Western mind, the Dalai Lama became romanticized and associated with the utopia Shangri-La, as portrayed in the classic 1933 novel of James Hilton. This fueled the popular Free Tibet movement, which is the generally accepted Western understanding of the sensitive socio-political situation.
The Dalai Lama reaches safety on Indian soil after a 14-day trek across the Himalayas, a fugitive from Red China's bloody repression of the Tibetan revolt. Now safe on Indian soil and free to speak his mind, the Dalai Lama charges that Beiping broke every promise to respect his country's independence and firmly denies Red claims he left Tibet against his will.
The Dalai Lama wrapped himself in the positive message of peace and harmony. The Western media continued to promote this image, but the exploitative nature of the Tibetan Buddhist theocracy has never been a point of discussion. In 1959, China once and for all abolished the Tibetan theocracy, as well as the caste system and its privileges of slavery and serfdom. Celebrating their newfound freedom, the liberated Tibetans enthusiastically burned their indenture and debt bondage documents. Extensive land reforms were enacted, and former slaves and serfs became free men and successful farmers, tilling their own land and herding their own cattle.